Hello, everyone. It's hang on. Let me get my bloody microphone. That was a bit of a mistake, wasn't it? Well, hello, and it's Friday, and it's history time. History Chap, Chris Green here, and welcome to everyone. So, look, for those of you who've never been on, come to these live shows before, this isn't like the normal videos I put out, okay, which are well scripted, really well researched, lots of visuals and pretty maps and things. This is just me talking to the camera. And got your opportunity to join in the discussion as well. So yeah, so it's a bit different, a little bit jazz. We go all over the show. So if you're expecting a really slick presentation here, this isn't for you. So please go and watch one of my other videos if that's what you prefer. But if you want a bit of a ramble around history, your opportunity to join in, then welcome. And already I can see loads of people in the chat. And this is one of the things, of course, I always do, keep referring to the chat. So Leslie over in South Carolina, lovely to see you, Leslie. Sarah Jane, as usual, thank you very much. Lovely to see you. And David from Spain, nice to see you. Thanks for your comment yesterday as well, David. I seem to remember I asked you to say something in the comments here today. I can't remember what the heck it was. I had a lot of comments last night with the latest video that went out. We got Japan. Wow, blimey, you must have not been able to sleep or something. I don't know what time it is in Japan, David, but lovely to see you here. Charlie Manson, North Yorkshire, a bit closer to home, Charlie. Hope the sun's shining for you over on your side of the Pennines. It's pretty good down here in Worcestershire today, about blinking time. We've got Angus from Australia. Lovely to see you, Angus, a long-time supporter. Thank you very much indeed. We got a hello. We have good afternoon, Chris. Thank you. Harry Shriver, another great fan and great supporter, generous supporter. So thank you very much, Harry. I appreciate all your support. Love all your comments to the different videos on YouTube. I think you must have seen every video I've done now. Good evening from India. Oh, wow, we're getting a heck of a lot of people from around the world here. So thank you very much indeed. Jen Ingle from a sunny and windy Cumbria. Yeah, there's a reason. There's a reason that there's lots of lakes in Cumbria. We have another David. Blimey. Good afternoon, and thank you for making history interesting. Well, I try my best. And as I say to people, I'm not really a historian. I try and tell stories from history. Bring history to life, make you sometimes think, I wonder what it'd like if I was there. And of course, I use a lot of history. I've got a history degree, so it's not like I'm just, I've never done research, and I do a lot of research in my videos. But I love just telling the stories, and there's another story that I'll tell you about that in a while. So London calling, thank you very much. Tony Waterhouse, lovely to see you as well, mate. Uncle Heavy, hey, from Northamptonshire. Lovely to see you. Terry from Cincinnati. It's 10 p.m. in Japan. Thank you very much, David. Well, thank you very much for joining, mate. We got Charlie Manson, nice and sunny in Yorkshire. Super name. Yes, your name is hard for primary English speakers. I was going to say greetings, but I'll be absolutely honest. I would need that broken down phonetically to pronounce your name over in India. It's based on an ancient dynasty. Whoa, nice one. Bit of history there. I'd love to do a bit more history about India. I was reading, some of you know, I've read The Anarchy recently by William Dalrymple, which was sort of about the growth of the East India Company, which in itself was fascinating. Fascinating that a small trading company could end up like they were, but equally fascinating just the whole disintegration of the Mughal Empire and the different factions with the Marathas and with Tipu Sultan down in southern India. Just how the India was fragmenting, and to a certain extent the East India Company were able to squeeze in between all the different factions, playing people off against each other until they all suddenly realized that the last man standing was the company, the East India Company, that they'd all used to fight each other with. Fascinating. And I found that whole part of Indian history a revelation, actually. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining me. So you've changed your name to Safadid instead. Thank you very much. But I'd love to know exactly how we pronounce your name, because that would be really cool and nice. Loving the latest Zulu Wars videos. Thank you. Plenty of Sahara in the sky down here in Spain. Uncle Heavy. Chris, I suspect you tell cracking bedtime stories. Funny enough, when my kids were growing up, yes, I was the parent that not only was delegated with storytelling, but was in demand. And I always remember I used to, I used to read, I tell stories, but I used to read stories as well. And I remember doing it the Harry Potter series for my daughter, and my wife at the time went in to do it, and she did the same Professor McGonagall voice, a Scottish accent for all the characters. So Hagrid spoke in a Scottish accent. Professor Dumbledore was in a Scottish, and in the end, she just said, "Mummy, go and get Daddy. He does the voices properly." So yeah, that would be on my tombstone probably. David Kersley, have I got a favorite historical character? Good one. Let me come back to that one in a while. Okay, in fact, I'll actually make a note of it. Thank you very much, David. Chris, good. Neil Morrison, good reaction on your American VC this morning on the Natasha and Debbie show. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, and I will have a link. In fact, I've got a link to the Natasha and Debbie show in the description below. I thought they're brilliant presenters. So anyway, I'll come back to that one. So Neil, so yeah, okay. Mohammed. I'm gonna practice that one for you. Okay, join me next week. And good morning from Massachusetts. Look, loads of you. In fact, I'm going to share something with you. I was doing some work this morning, actually, just on where does everyone come from on YouTube? This is not necessarily you folk, but where do folk come from? Because people say to me, oh, why do you sometimes you use Americanisms in your talk? Well, yeah, I've traveled around the world, worked around the world, picked up quite a lot of stuff, a little bit nomadic, but some in 2024. The biggest contingent, you won't be surprised to know, is Brits. 35% of all my viewers, all the views I've had on YouTube this in 2024 have been from Britain. 27% from the USA, which is huge. 10% from Australia. So, and then really, if I call it the Anglosphere, and I don't mean it in particularly in a political sense, but folk who speak English as their first tongue. Then we got the Canadians on 5%. We then got New Zealand, Ireland, South Africa. The first non-English speaking tongues are the Germans. They come in. Germans and Netherlands are good as well. Ghana had a lot of interest from Ghana, mainly about the Ashanti Wars, or at least Sir Garnet Wolseley's Ashanti War and the establishment of the Ashanti Ring of Officers. And what else we got? We have Spain and India, hey, and the Philippines. So they're the that's not all. They're just the toppies. So I find it fascinating, and isn't that amazing that YouTube can bring people together from all around the world? And this is lovely, having so many of you here. We've got Colorado Springs, Wellington. Colorado Springs, I'll let you into a secret. That's where my mum's cousin, so that make me her second cousin. She lives in Colorado Springs. She was a GI bride and went out there, not during the Second World War. GI bride just shortly afterwards. Chuck was based over here in the US Air Force in East Anglia. Surprise, surprise. Near Newmarket. That's where they were. And they actually had a house in Newmarket for a while. Anyway, she went out there and she's been there since the 1950s. So speaks English but with a very American accent now. And then she just has little bits that make her sound a bit like Joan Collins. But there you go. Thank you, Charlie. Yes, get people to give a like. If you are watching any of my videos, I'm doing quite a lot of work and quite a lot of coaching around YouTube, and I follow a lot of. I'm on a YouTube program, sort of almost like a business partner program at the minute, where they sort of give you tips about how to improve your videos and how to make more money out of YouTube and blah blah. The likes, basically engagement, is something that YouTube's algorithm loves. Engagement. So comments, likes, sharing my video with people that you think would be good are all very good as well. Neil Morrison, you've been a member of my of the membership channel now for 4 months, so thank you very much indeed. And I just want to quickly thank. I've already talked to Leslie. Of course, you're on. In fact, thank you very much. You've renewed this only in the last couple of days, Leslie. So thank you, Harry. Of course, you're in there, but also to welcome Graham and Elton, who've joined this week. So I'm going to be looking at maybe revamping the membership and doing a lot more of these sort of live talks, but on specific topics inside the membership channel, and moving the time around a little bit as well. So we'll probably have call it a lunchtime slot it for UK folk, and a lot of the Americans are picking it up now. Even people in Japan are sitting there at 10 o'clock at night. But I might look at trying to do some live talks where maybe we do it around 7 p.m. UK time, 7:30. So a lot more Americans and Canadians join in. A lot of Brits won't mind that. But also doing a slightly earlier morning slot as well, something like an 11 a.m., 10 a.m., where people, Japan, Hong Kong, New Zealand, Australia, Philippines can join in as well. Don't know if that people would like that. So thank you very much for all my supporters so far. And that's not meant as that wasn't meant as a plug particularly, but I'm looking to. I love this sort of community, and so yeah, looking to do more of it. So. What do people think? Have people had a chance so far to watch the new video about the Battle of Hlobane in the Zulu Wars? I don't know what people thought of it, whether you were even aware that this battle took place. It was the video I released last night here in the UK. And one of the questions I actually asked in the video about Hlobane was, the Zulu Wars is probably my most popular theme. And I've got some playlists, and it's definitely the most popular playlist. And it sort of, outdoes the First and Second World Wars. It outdoes one of my favorites, which is the Mahdist Wars in Sudan. But the Zulu Wars, it smashes the Boer War out of the park. And what is it about the Zulu Wars that people love? Because my best video by a mile is what happened to Colour Sergeant Bourne after Rorke's Drift. But, if you look at my Isandlwana, my Rorke's Drift, I've done several about Rorke's Drift, they all do incredibly well. What is it about the Zulu Wars that get you? I mean, I appreciate you can't speak on behalf of everyone else out there on YouTube, but I'm just intrigued. What is it about the Zulu Wars? Because, I mean, there've been plenty of other wars, and let's face it, the British Empire in the 19th century were fighting... they were fighting some pretty tough characters, well-armed people. I mean, you could argue, the Russians in the Crimean War, pretty well-armed. The Boers, definitely well-armed. The Indian, certainly the sepoys who mutinied had been armed by the East India Company, so they were pretty well-armed. The Egyptian army under Arabi Pasha, well-armed, trained by the French. So the Zulus didn't have that. Was it because it was just so? I mean, and obviously the bravery. The Ashanti were brave. The Mahdist warriors were brave. Certainly the Indians in the Indian Mutiny, the Great Revolt of 1857, were brave. So what is it about the Zulu Wars that gets people? I'm going to quickly look, because having rambled that question, that's bound to have given you some of you a chance to answer. Saladin says, I like the Mahdist War. Good on you, mate. I'm thinking about doing a book about the Mahdist War later this year. And I saw someone else saying they liked my regiment in the army had the Battle of Hasheen as the regimental day. Again, an Indian one. Maybe I'll do a bit more about India at some stage, but questions about the Zulu Wars here. Battles a close shave, Hlobane. I mean, maybe that was it, that there were some close shaves, because in fairness, a lot of the battles in the latter part of the 19th century for the British around the world were pretty one-sided. Omdurman, as much as we'd like to say, that it could have gone wrong if Hector MacDonald hadn't moved his men round, possibly. But it was a bloodbath, pretty one-sided. The Boer War wasn't, obviously, and it's interesting. Was that because the Boer War, it was white on white, and they were armed with Mauser rifles and that, and actually the British just got their comeuppance, whereas the Zulus actually were able to outthink, outfight the British despite not having the armaments. I don't know. Is it perhaps the Zulus are the British version of cowboys and Indians? And Jen said, for me, the Zulu Wars are so unequal in technology. Yeah. They held their own so well. And I wonder if that's actually what it is, that actually to a certain extent, if the Russians had held their own, if the Boers had held their own, armed with the latest rifles and that, it was like, well, yeah, you've got the weapons. And let's face it, the British Army had some interesting, let's just call them interesting officers. I think in business we might have called them promoted beyond their abilities. But certainly the late Victorian Army had one or two officers, and certainly the middle of the 19th century had some officers who probably weren't up to the job. Others who, people like Colin Campbell, definitely up to the job. The movie Zulu, they've got legendary status from Zulu. Yeah, could very well be. I mean, Zulu itself is a very interesting film. Michael Caine and Stanley Baker. Interestingly, Stanley Baker's birthday today. Oh, he's not around to celebrate it anymore, but there you go. But Zulu, I mean, Zulu to a large extent, the Zulu Wars sort of disappeared from public memory by the turn of the century, by the turn of the 20th century. They disappeared from public memory. And then tail end of the 1950s, beginning of the 1960s, we had Donald Morris wrote Washing of the Spears, which was sort of the seminal book on the Zulu Wars, or at least it was at the time. Interestingly, he was actually working for the CIA in Berlin, West Berlin at the time. So most of the Washing of the Spears was done from distance. He wasn't down in South Africa doing his research. And obviously, it was the first time anyone really researched the Zulu Wars. He was in Berlin. Lots of stuff has come out since. He sort of suddenly reignited people's interest in the Zulu Wars. And very soon afterwards, we had the film Zulu. And that's, for a lot of us, that's how we all got interested in Zulu, despite it having more holes in it than a piece of Emmental cheese. Same as the American Indian Wars in the West, two totally different cultures, and the arrogance. That's a good one as well, actually. And I think we saw that arrogance again last night in the Battle of Hlobane, where, Sir Evelyn Wood basically refused to believe that a Zulu army could be anywhere near him, even though, well, it was pretty obvious that his scouts had not done a good job. Either he had not given them a good enough brief, or they were rubbish. But either way, let's be honest, 20,000 Zulus, despite the fact they could use natural cover and things, I appreciate. But 20,000 Zulus moving over hilltops and things should have been spotted by the British scouts, and they weren't. And indeed, I'd read somewhere, and I think it was in Adrian Greaves' book about Hlobane, where he said that some of the Zulu scouts, some of the Zulu auxiliaries who were with the two forces, with Buller's force in particular, saw the fires, and they knew what the fires were. They knew that they were signals to the Zulu army. But they didn't bother telling Evelyn Wood because they had been they'd been dismissed so often in the past. Anything they'd ever said to the British had been dismissed. So it was almost like, oh well, I'm not going to bother. See how we get on. As it was, it was a close run thing, and actually, it wouldn't have taken a lot for Hlobane to have been an absolute disaster, would it? Safavid, you're sorry for your spelling mistakes. You're typing from phone. Don't worry. I think most of my audience here, mate, we all struggle with phones and podgy fingers, don't we? So we're not quite like teenagers. My kids are unbelievably fast, and they're not teenagers anymore. They're in their 20s. But there you go. I'm just reading all your comments. I don't want to read them. I don't want to go word for word, only because, of course, you can all read them as well. But Matthew, don't know. It might come down to the movies, Zulu and Khartoum. Yeah, because there's never been a box office movie about, say, the Ashanti Wars. Not really anything in England or America about the British in India, particularly. I'm sure there are various films and in Bollywood, and certainly I'm aware of the very start of the mutiny in India. It's been subject to film, but hasn't translated across to the US and British markets. And really, the British in India, it's down to things like Gunga Din and other such films which have a place. Kim, which had a place, but they don't necessarily tell the whole historic story, do they? David, I'm typing and painting miniatures. That's your excuse. Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. Any other modelers here, or modelers or war game people? I was actually on a modeling / war game podcast, or not podcast, YouTube live with another on another channel. probably about 2 months ago now. It was great, really interesting folk, but I never really got into modelling. I don't have the patience. I like the end result, but not all that work that goes with it. Uncle Heavy, don't forget Zulu Dawn too. Nice girl Dawn. Oh, really? Zulu Dawn, interesting film. Most people prefer Zulu to Zulu Dawn, although I'll come back to something I was going to say on that in a minute. But Zulu Dawn has less historic inaccuracies than Zulu. It's got a fair few, but nowhere near as many as Zulu. Interestingly, some of you will know Chris Parkinson, Redcoat Military History. He and I are stumbling our way to doing a joint video. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to, well, this is our latest thinking. We're actually going to do a video looking at 4 films from the Victorian period and how accurate they are. So we're not going to do Zulu, and Chris can answer for that one. But Chris, I think currently we're breaking it up. Chris will report back on Zulu Dawn and also the Shangani Patrol, Rhodesia or Zimbabwe now. And I'm going to be looking at the 4 Feathers, and 55 Days at Peking. So I get the world tour. He's sticking in Southern Africa, lazy devil. Anyone think he lives there? But anyway, so watch out for that. But 4 Feathers. And by the way, I'm actually reading, well, it's actually on audio, Audible. I'm listening to the original 4 Feathers book, not the films, the book. And so I was laughing with Chris because I said, actually, we've got 2 things going on. How close to the truth are things like the 4 Feathers? And of course, we've had effectively 3 films about the 4 Feathers. We've got the 4 Feathers in the 1930s, just before the Second World War. Then we had Storm Over the Nile. And then we had the one about 10, 15 years ago with Heath Ledger and that in it, and which had some pretty good cinematography. But they all sort of vary from historic accuracy, but interestingly, they all vary from the book as well. The book's really good, actually, written in 1902, and I don't think I've ever read a novel apart from Charles Dickens that was written that long ago. Really enjoyable. Anyway, please do the Bollywood movie on Mangal Pandey. I love Bollywood films, the few I've seen, because there's also another one about the Battle of Sarangari. But they're basically, the British are not just portrayed badly, we're like pantomime villains. And, apart from laughing, ha 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 ha, it's all sort of there. And I've actually watched them at the Mangal Pandey film. And historically, does it suit a particular narrative? Yeah. Makes you proud to be an Indian, I guess. So it sort of does its job, doesn't it? And tells a story. And don't forget, history is all about telling stories from perspectives. Because just go take South Africa, take Ireland. You got 2 different sides in anything. Like talk to me about the Boer War. Well, actually, let's not go there because some Afrikaners will get really upset. But Afrikaners have a view about the Boer War. English-speaking members of South Africa have a view about the Boer War, and they won't be the same. It's different narratives. And people say you should speak the truth. Well, what's the truth? Even inside our own country, what's the truth? Winston Churchill, good or bad? Well, it rather depends if you're a far left-winger whose family were on strike in, the Rhondda in the South Welsh valleys when he authorised troops to go in, or you see Winston Churchill as the great wartime leader. He did both. You take your pick. Don't go into the comments now, please. But you can see history is whatever you want to make it. There is no absolute truth any more than there is a truth about our families. Was Grandad a good bloke, bad bloke, funny bloke, sad bloke? We don't know. It all depends who you were and how you worked with him, didn't it? Anyway, right. Let me crack on with some historic dates from British history this week, because that's partly why you've come on. You've probably come on and joined in all of this chat as well. Disabled Welshman, I prefer the original 1939 Four Feathers. Didn't think much of the Heath Ledger remake. Let me address that, then we'll do the dates. I didn't think too much of the Heath Ledger remake either. Although actually, yeah, there's bits they've taken from the book which the original Four Feathers didn't. So, but what's interesting, if you might recall as well, there was a film in the 1950s called Storm Over the Nile, which basically told the same story. It was produced by the same same producer, same director as the original Four Feathers. And he basically, this is outrageous when you think about it, he basically lifted most of the Four Feathers and put it in the new film. So all the battle scenes, all the Mahdist army gathering, mounting their camels, everything else, if you go back, all the British soldiers getting ready to shoot them, all of that came from his previous film. I mean, that is the ultimate cut and paste, isn't it? So I will be talking about that with Chris Parkinson where we do that talk. Charlie Manson, I've just seen your work, 3 Afrikaners in Iraq. Great military guys, awesome friends, have an inbuilt dislike for the British. Yeah. And I've got Irish friends in a similar boat. Yep. And rather depends how your family suffered in the concentration camps, in particular, in South Africa. You would have a coloured view on the British. One day I'll be brave enough to do a whole piece on the concentration camps. And don't forget, of course, there were Brits like Millicent Fawcett and in particular Emily Hobhouse, who raised the plight of the concentration camps. In a large extent, it was British activists who put a spotlight on the concentration camps, not Boers. Boers weren't in a position to really influence the British press in London and Parliament. And it was people like Emily Hobhouse who did and actually went out there. So, again, a much more murky, mixed up history than maybe a straightforward thing. Right. Right, let's crack on for a few bits from British history, okay? 17th of March, this week, back on Sunday, as it were, 17th of March, 1328, heading back in time, the Treaty of Edinburgh is signed. This brought to a close the, nearly 30-year first war of Scottish independence, or the first war of Scottish independence, which had basically been fought ever since Edward I had invaded Scotland, and it obviously ultimately culminated in this is the period of William Wallace, Braveheart, the Battle of Falkirk, but it culminated obviously in Bannockburn, the defeat of Edward II of England by Robert Bruce. And the Treaty of Edinburgh was obviously signed in Edinburgh. It was then ratified by the English at Northampton. By now, Edward III was on the English throne. Robert the Bruce was on the Scottish throne, Robert Bruce, and he was King Robert I of Scotland. The treaty basically, as I say, put an end to the 30-year war that the two nations have been fighting. In return for about £20,000 from the Scots, the English recognised Scottish independence, which is a date that should be remembered by the Scots, I guess. They also recognised Robert Bruce as the King of Scotland, and partly this whole English intervention under Edward I was because there'd been a vacancy on the Scottish throne, and he'd sided with one faction and tried to impose that particular faction on the rest of Scotland. So Scotland was now independent. Robert Bruce, who came from that rival faction, was recognised as King of Scotland, and his heirs would be king as well. And finally, they agreed that the border that had been fixed back in the 1200s with Alexander II of Scotland, with the Treaty of York, so nearly sort of 60 years before, something like that, would the border of Scotland would be reinstated as per that treaty, which is fundamentally still the border of Scotland between England and Scotland to this day. So there you go. Hello to Houston. Uncle Heavy, I love that. Thank you very much. Same date, but up into Victoriana, or at least Edwardian Britain, 17th of March, 1912. Captain Lawrence Oates leaves the tent the Scot of the Antarctic's tent in Antarctica. So that's really badly phrased, isn't it? So let me just rewind. So there'd been a race to the South Pole up until 1912. No one had reached the South Pole. And the closest person had been Shackleton. But so the race was on. This was almost like the moon race of the 1950s, 1960s. Who would be the first person to the South Pole? And the race was on between the British under Captain Robert Falcon Scott and the Norwegians under Amundsen. Eventually, the British whittled their it was massive. I mean, Antarctica is a huge continent, and the journey was the best part of 900 miles. And they were sort of they had an expedition team bringing, taking goods and stuff along with them. But in the end, Scott took, including himself, 4 other men, so a team of 5, to assault the pole, to actually go the last 150 odd miles to the pole on foot. They got there only to find a tent with the Norwegian flag and a letter from Amundsen wishing them well, but saying, it looks like I've won. So rather deflated, they now had to make their journey back. 5 men walking back from the South Pole. One of them died. Edgar Evans perished en route, left 4 of them. Oates was he was struggling. He had gangrene. He was holding everyone up, basically. He was slowing the party down, but they were keeping together, but they were going at the speed of the slowest man. And he realized that actually, if they kept going at this speed, they would not get to the next food depot. And so on the 17th of December, he left their expedition tent, little tent they were in, with the words, "I'm going outside, I may be some time." And he deliberately went out and basically sacrificed himself, wandered off into the snow and ice, and died of hypothermia, I guess. And it was actually on his 32nd birthday. That was his 32nd birthday. So it was always seen, Oates walking out the tent is seen as one of those great British stiff upper lip moments, sacrificing himself for the rest of the team. Of course, unfortunately, his sacrifice was in vain. They didn't find the food depot that they were looking for, and Scott's last entry in his diary was on the 29th of March, 1912, so nearly 2 weeks after Oates had made his sacrifice. Interestingly, Captain Oates, he was actually a British Army captain, had been a captain, been commissioned in the 19th century, late 19th century, had served in the Boer War, had actually been injured in the Boer War, mentioned in dispatches as well, and been recommended for a Victoria Cross. But that recommendation was not approved. So he never got a Victoria Cross. So there you go. Speaking of Victoria Crosses, everyone, absolutely delighted that I was approached a couple of weeks ago by Natasha and Debbie. They're over in America, and they said, could we use your film about the first American to receive the Victoria Cross? Because it's a story that I did just before Christmas. And it was all about basically an American who joined the Royal Navy, had run away from home, ended up, he jumped on a merchant ship, ended up in Hong Kong, British colony, ran out of money, joined the Royal Navy, like you do. And he ended up in the British bombardment of in Japan in the 1860s. And in the subsequent action, he was recommended and awarded the Victoria Cross. So a great story in its own right, but absolutely fantastic. Natasha and Debbie's show is really, really good. They went live this morning with my video. They actually were like, they sit there like this, but can you imagine the video shows just in front somewhere, like here? Okay, and they're commenting on it. It's really cool, and I'd really recommend it. They're very into veterans. They're into military service. They love the videos around that. And I have to say, thought they were absolutely fantastic hosts or hostesses. And I've put a link to the show. It's actually a link to my video in their show. Okay, so you'll see my video again if you haven't seen it before. But I really would urge you to go and have a look at their show, because I think they're absolutely fantastic. And I've actually messaged them after their live this morning, just to say, look, I think we need to do something together in the future. I think there'll be some, collaboration would be brilliant. But really recommend it. Bit different to me, not least because they're two ladies from America. But Yeah, really good. So yeah, please give them a shout. And as I say, I've put a link in the description. So David, yeah, you've been to Szymanowski, yeah, Szymanowski, yeah, Szymanowska. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. They put cannons back up where the battery was. Yes, I've seen some pictures of those modern day, like tourist photos. So yeah, thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Disabled Welshman, for suggesting that Debbie and Natasha's show is really good. I'm not a voice in the dark here, singing by myself. So what else have we got? 18th of March, 1789, slightly non-military. The last execution by burning in Britain. 1789. You know, we're talking. We always think of burning at the stake as something that happened in medieval times and a bit of Bloody Mary. Uh, 1789, thinking French Revolution was only about to break out. I mean, admittedly, they had the guillotine, which is even more ghastly than burning at the stake. Well, I don't know. Probably both pretty shit. Pardon my English. But anyway, it was a lady called Catherine Murphy. Catherine Murphy was part of a counterfeiting. Was convicted of being part of a counterfeiting gang. They were forging coins, and interestingly, forging coins at the time was high treason. Not quite sure why, but it was high treason. And the penalty for men historically for high treason was hang, drawing, and quartering. Ghastly way to die. They were actually the men by now. They were just the men in the group were just hanged. But historically, hang, drawing, and quartering was never given to women because it was a bit rude to rip open their blouse so that you could cut out their heart and their insides because you might see their boob. I mean, admittedly, and this is one of these warped things, isn't it? There was nothing wrong with pulling out someone's heart from their body, but showing their boob, bit risky. So historically, women who were convicted of high treason were either beheaded if they're royal or burned at the stake. So she was going to be burned at the stake. However, by now sensitivities, even in 1789, were starting to say this is not really, this is not what civilized people do. So she was actually taken to the pyre. She was stood on the pyre, but in the middle of the pyre where she was now propped up, there was a little bench. So she stood on the bench. They stuck a noose around her neck. Okay, so it was gallows. And then they kicked the bench away. So she actually hanged, and she died, or she suffocated, strangulated, and then she was dead. And then they lit the fire. So she was burned at the stake, but actually she was dead already. In fact, actually, you have to go back to 1726 to get the story of the last person actually burned alive at a stake in Britain. Ghastly, but that's for another day. Okay, so Catherine Murphy. Funny enough, it was outside. It was in public. It was outside Newgate Prison in London. The following year, it was finally repealed. And here's the laugh: it wasn't repealed purely because it was a ghastly way to die. It was because people in the locality of Newgate Prison complained about the smell of burning flesh. I kid you not. So there you go. Funny enough, the same day, 18th of March, 1824, the Tolpuddle Martyrs, the 6 Tolpuddle Martyrs, were convicted in Dorset. One of those great sort of moments of British sort of social, political history and the trade union movement. Tolpuddle Martyrs were agricultural workers. Britain, after the Napoleonic Wars, was going through a major recession. Tolpuddle Martyrs had their wages reduced 3 times on the trot. So we're not talking no pay rise. We're actually talking your salary goes down. So they came together. They formed a secret society. They took a secret oath to look after each other, not to overthrow the government or anything like that. However, basically, the local authorities, the local landowners were obviously very worried that agricultural workers could all suddenly start, joining a trade union, a friendly society, and start to take action against them. And they quite enjoyed having the whip hand themselves. They didn't want the workers doing that. So they found a law that had been passed about 30 years beforehand during the French Revolutionary times, saying secret oaths were a crime. And they were tried under this law that was hardly ever used in Britain, certainly haven't been used since the Napoleonic Wars. They were found guilty and sentenced to transportation to Australia. Massive outcry. 800,000 people signed a petition to Parliament. Just to put that into context, Britain, or the British Isles, including Ireland, okay, I did a little bit of research on this. England's population at the time was about 12 million, 2 million in Scotland, 6 million in Ireland. Irish population at this time, before the potato famine, was huge. Yeah, it was half the size of England. But anyway, if you put the British Isles together, that's 20 million people. So that was nearly 5% of the population of the British Isles signed a petition. Now, we don't know if they signed as Mickey Mouse and things like that, but that's huge. I mean, if you look at it nowadays in Britain, that you've got to have about 2 million people on a petition. We're talking a sizable petition. Eventually, after 3 years of lobbying Parliament, they were given a full pardon and brought back to the UK. Tolpuddle Martyrs. So there we go. Anyway, how are we all getting on with the chats here? Uncle Heavy, blimey, you're on one here, mate. In Viking England, the penalty for debasing coinage was castration and lopping off the right hand. So based upon that, burning at the stake was, was pretty nice, really, wasn't it? Dalton's here. Nice to see you. And again, a supporter. Thank you very much indeed, Dalton, as is Charlie in my membership group, in my membership channel. So thank you very much. YouTube are having fun. 5th lot of adverts so far. Now, you see, Sarah Jane, I don't want to be Johnny come lately. Says, I don't get anything here on my chat, on the screen here. I'm not even being told if the adverts are running, let alone what adverts are on. So apologies, Sarah Jane. But yeah, there you go. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Chris, could I do a story? This is Christopher Warren. Could I do a story when the British fought the British? And how the Gurkhas came to serve in the British Army. Do you mean how the British fought the British or the British fought the Gurkhas? If it's the British fought the Gurkhas, it's on my hit list, okay? So it's coming. It's coming. I've realised that I can get about one video out a week, okay? So bear with me. I'm trying to up the game, honest, but it's on the hit list and it's quite near the top. So watch this space, Chris. Thank you. Afternoon, Invisible Ray. Nice to see you. Tony Waterhouse has only had one set of adverts so far. So there you go, Sarah Jane. You need to be wherever Tony Waterhouse is watching the videos. And Charlie Manson saying adverts. It's why I pay for YouTube Premium. Yeah, I don't know how much YouTube Premium is actually, Charlie, but yeah, you don't see adverts, do you, on YouTube Premium? But so it's advert free YouTube, which you may or may not like. I know my mum, when she watches it, and when I watch it, I either skip or I just go make a cup of tea and let it run. Neil Morrison says, yes, lots more adverts today. You must be doing well, Chris. Adverts must be algorithms in on you. It'd be nice if they told me. That's all I can say. Try to work out the YouTube algorithm in the nicest way. If I could work out the YouTube algorithm, there'll be some really big players that would, and basically people like, I don't know, History Hit or something would just dominate the channels, wouldn't they? So I guess actually the fact that none of us really understand the algorithm is probably good news. Dalton saying in Canada, YouTube Premium is $12.99 a month. Thank you very much. $15 for me, says Forlorn Fool. Invisible Ray, do I watch The Fortress? He always does gruesome executions from history. No, I haven't. No. And Joe Butler, hello from Appleby. Oh, you're just down the road from Jen there. So a nice Appleby, lovely place. Gypsy Fair, of course, always good. History guy from Wales. Hey, Chris, do you know much about the English Civil War? I find it fascinating. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. We've got an event from there and a battle from there. Okay. So thank you, Fluky659. Thank you very much indeed. Leslie Davis says the British versus the British fighting each other is probably best summed up by the Wars of the Roses. Could be, or just going back up there to history guy from Wales, what most people call the English Civil War, also called the War of the Three Kingdoms. The British fighting the British. Fascinating stuff. Anyway, off we go. Jen is saying hello to you, Joe in Appleby. I knew two Cumbrians sticking together. Right, let's get back to, and in fact, English fighting English. Here we go. 20th of March, 1470, the Battle of Nibley Green. Oh, you couldn't make it up, could you? It sounds like something out of Trumpton, doesn't it? The Battle of Nibley Green. It's fought in Gloucestershire. And it was the last time the British, we love all our lasts, don't we? We've already had one, last burning at the stake. This was the last time two private armies fought each other in England. Because don't forget, this was actually in the time of the Wars of the Roses, which we just talked about. But the Battle of Nibley Green was also a time, or the Wars of the Roses were also a period where various landed interests, aristocrats, nobles, were actually having private feuds. Very often they would align with the House of Lancaster or the House of York. They all had private, small retinues of their own armed supporters. But they were actually, in the meantime, they were actually having their own feuds. As I say, very often lining up with the House of Lancaster, House of York during the Wars of the Roses. Interestingly, Edward IV, leader of the House of York, was up dealing actually with a rebellion by Warwick and his brother, the Duke of Clarence, in the north of England. And you know, what's the old expression about while the cat's away, the mice can play? So with the king firmly up in the north of England, down in Gloucestershire, two feuding families decided that they would have a bit of a fight. The feud was actually between two nobles, Thomas Talbot and William Berkeley. William Berkeley, Lord Berkeley, was the principal landowner of Gloucestershire. And he and Talbot were having a running dispute about who owned certain manors in the county. Basically, young Talbot challenged the slightly older William Berkeley to either a personal duel or they could meet for a battle with their retainers. William Berkeley said, "I'll go for the battle option, thank you very much, young man," and turned up. Now, he was the principal landowner of Gloucestershire. So young Talbot rocked up and suddenly realised that actually he was up against the principal landowner of Gloucestershire, who'd called out all the people who owed him favours. So there was something like 150 men with Talbot and well over 1,000 with Berkeley. Talbot was was on the high ground. Actually, this was all close to a wood. England had a lot more woods and forests than it has nowadays, and there was a wood. Originally from the Anglo-Saxon, it was called the Big Wood in Gloucestershire. Big Wood is Mickle. So it was the Mickle Wood, the Big Wood. That changed to Michael Wood. And driving down the M5, some of you will know Michael Wood Services. Well, the battle is between the town of Dursley and Michael Wood Services around the Michael Wood, the Mickle Wood. Basically, Talbot had some high ground. He vacated because he saw Berkeley turn up with a small group of men and thought, game on, I'm going to charge down the hill, take him out. What he didn't realise was that Berkeley had positioned most of his men in the Michael Wood, the Mickle Wood, and suddenly he basically rode straight into a trap. He was killed with two arrows to his face, and Talbot's supporters suddenly realised with their leader dead and up against 1,000 men, it was time to flee. It was a rout. Many of them were killed, and that was the last time that we had a fight between two nobles in a battle between two nobles in England. And just like to thank the Battlefield Trust for supplying the information for me for that one. I'm a member of the Battlefield Trust. Somewhere here we have. There we go. That's my little card. Member. Great resource actually. If anyone wants to look it up, if you're interested in battles in Britain, this is not stuff about the Mahdists or Zulu Wars or anything like that. But they've got great resources, a lot of battlefield information, a lot of ordnance survey maps showing various battlefields. So principally Wars of the Roses, English civil wars, and the Jacobite rebellions, and indeed the wars between England and Scotland at different stages as well. So there you go. Let's just see what's going on here. American here, says the Cliff Dweller, fascinated by British service veterans diaspora throughout the ages. Armies that never came back before the days of modern transport. Yeah, I mean, obviously you had soldiers of fortune, but obviously you had people who just stayed where they were as well. And, you know, there's some incredible, I will do one at some stage, Cliff Dweller, about the Napoleonic War veterans who went and fought in South America during the South American Wars of Independence against Spain. People forget, of course, most of South and Central America was part of the Spanish Empire, and principally people like Simon Bolivar were leading a rebellion, and ex-British servicemen, some of whom were complete and utter scoundrels, went down there. One or two were, some played key roles and carried out their service incredibly well. Others, as I say, had lied through their teeth on their CV about how great a military experience they had. But it was called the British Legion in Ecuador, in particular. Fascinating. In fact, again, listen to a really good talk from the Battlefield Trust on them. They do some really good talks, both battlefield tours in Britain. They also have some online talks as well. Can't remember quite what's coming up in the near future. Yeah, a lot of stuff. Anyway, there we go. I'd love to have met Fred Dibner and his mate, Alf Molyneux. I'm one of those. I finished service in Japan and never left. Thank you, David. Thanks for sharing that. So who were you with, David? Were you in, which force were you? Neil Morrison says a village in Italy claims to have been founded by Scottish mercenaries. Very possible. There were a lot of Scots, actually, who served abroad at different times, not least depending on who was in political control in Scotland. I don't just mean the English, but that included. Interesting set of novels set in the period with a monk called Cadfael, which I think was made into a TV series at some stage. Derek Jacobi possibly served in it, I think. Scroll back. Okay, we won't go into whole Fred Dibner things. I'm gonna have to scroll all the way to the top, and I've got to keep going here. So, what else have we got? Another English versus English, or British versus British. It was English versus English, and some Welsh here actually. 21st of March, 1643, the Battle of Stow on the Wold. Again, we've had Nibley Green in Gloucestershire. Sounds lovely until you found there's a battle there. Stow on the Wold, also in Gloucestershire, but further up, heading on the road towards heading on the road towards Stratford-upon-Avon, up the Foss Way. It was the last battle of what was classified as the First English Civil War. The Civil War, I don't want to go into loads of it, and I think there is definitely something I can do. Maybe, joking apart, maybe on the main YouTube channel, maybe as some talks in the members channel. Not quite sure yet. Okay, but the English Civil War, as people call it, tends to be put in history books, was actually a civil war that was being fought in, obviously, in Wales, in Scotland, in Ireland, and they were different war. They sort of came together. It wasn't different, the two sides in all those countries. There were other agendas going on, and not only did you therefore have some wars that were civil wars, with the king always involved in them somewhere, and supporters of the king, but you also had the war broke into several parts. So the English Civil War Part 1 was finished effectively with Charles I being executed. Okay, and it didn't. Sorry, Civil War Part 1 finished with Charles I being captured. Beg your pardon. Civil War Part 2 ended with him being executed, and Civil War Part 3, his son Charles II being defeated at Worcester. So the end of basically the English Civil War had sort of started off reasonably well for King Charles I. Over the years, over a period of a couple of years, the parliamentarians had started to gain the upper hand, really came to a major blow at the Battle of Naseby, where Oliver Cromwell had led a charge of the parliamentary cavalry that had captured most of Charles's infantry. And really, Charles had virtually no infantry left as a royalist force. The final nail in the coffin came on the 21st of March, 1643, at Stow on the Wold. It was a battle. Sir Jacob Astley was commanding the Royalists. The Royalists had somewhere in the 2,500 to 3,000 troops against 2,700 parliamentary troops, led by Welshmen. Colonel Thomas Morgan. Morgan's an interesting character in his own right. He's one of these people that no one's ever heard of, not even in Wales. But he was a bit of a military genius at the time. Ended up, I won't tell you too much more about him at the minute because we'll go off down a rabbit hole. But anyway, the battle basically outside of the town. parliamentarians started to win. The royalists flooded back, running through the streets of Stow on the Wold. Bit of a street fighting as the parliamentarians chased them. And in the main square at Stow on the Wold, they surrendered. Something like 200 royalists were killed in the battle, but 1,700 surrendered. Now, remember, his force was only about 2,500. So between killed and prisoner, out of 2,500, the royalists had lost something like 1,900. And that really was the end of the royalist army at that stage in England. And 5-6 weeks later, Charles actually surrendered. Interestingly, Charles didn't surrender to the English parliamentarians. He surrendered to the Scottish Covenanters who had occupied Newcastle. And he surrendered to them, but they handed him back to the English parliamentarians. And that was the end of Civil War Part 1. Charles was then held in the awful confines of Hampton Court Palace, from where two things happened. Number one, he got into negotiation with the Scots to flip sides. And because don't forget, he was a Stuart from Scotland, relating back, by the way, ultimately to Robert Bruce, who we mentioned at the beginning of this talk. Charles basically convinced the Scottish, or some of the Scots, to invade England and try and raise the royalist cause once more. He, at the same time, escaped from Hampton Court. He went to the Isle of Wight, where he thought he'd be safe. Actually, he was wrong. The governor of Carisbrooke Castle imprisoned him. And Cromwell and co., this was the straw that broke the camel's back, actually, because up until then, they'd been trying to find some way of having an accommodation with King Charles I. But he had, don't forget, England and Scotland at this time were two separate countries. They just happened to share the same king. Okay? So politically, not united countries. And that wouldn't happen until Queen Anne later on in the early 1700s. And basically, the hardliners in Parliament, or in hardliners in the parliamentary cause, basically said that Charles had been conspiring with a foreign country to invade England, which he technically had, Scotland. And that's why they charged him with high treason. And that was ultimately the charge they went after him on, and that's what cost Charles his life. English history 1.1 there, okay, but so interesting. That's traces its way back to Stow on the Wold. Lovely place, Stow on the Wold. Anyone who's ever been in that part of the world, any of my American friends, if you ever come to England, don't just stay in London. Personally, I think London's the best city in the world from a history perspective, but even better than Rome. But I have to say, get out and about. Go to Cornwall. I'm off there tomorrow morning, actually. In fact, to the next bay from this one. I'm off to Morganporth in North Cornwall, but go to the Cotswolds as well, and don't just go to Stratford, but some absolutely great places. And there's a pub that claims to be England's oldest pub in Stow on the Wold. But then, do you know what? Every town in England claims it's got an oldest pub. And personally, I'll go for what I consider my hometown, St Albans, the Fighting Cocks in St Albans. Its history takes a fair bit of beating, but there you go. So no doubt, now I bet we're going to have loads of people now deciding to comment as to what is the oldest pub they've been in, stroke the pub in their town, which claims to be the oldest, because English folk, we have a bit of a thing on that one, don't we? Uncle Heavy, you were just asking about Captain Thomas Morgan. No, he's not the Captain Thomas Morgan of rum fame. But in fact, Captain Thomas Morgan, his role, he actually ended up in Scotland with General Monk, English commander, in charge of the parliamentarian army in Scotland during the Commonwealth, during Oliver Cromwell's republic and dictatorship. In 1660, he, along with Monk, were instrumental in inviting back the executed Charles's son, Charles II, to the English throne, or the English and Scottish thrones. And they marched their army from Scotland towards London just to convince doubting parliamentarians that they should all vote to allow Charles II to come back, the Restoration. And he finished his days as he ended up with a baronetcy. He was knighted for his services, even though he'd been a parliamentary general and had been loyal to Cromwell's regime, he ends up being knighted. So there you go. Last one for today, okay, is on the 22nd of March, 1885, the Battle of Tofrek in Sudan. Battle of Tofrek was part of the second Suakin expedition, and I've done a video about that just over a year ago now, actually. It's one of those unknown bits of the whole British Sudan campaign. Tofrek was basically timeline. The Martyrs Rising happened. The Egyptians, who had been the imperial rulers of Sudan, not the British at this stage, they had been basically kicked out of most of Sudan except for Khartoum, where Gordon was sent to help evacuate the Egyptian administration. It's a bit like Kabul all over again. But he was there to evacuate the Egyptians and basically leave Sudan to the Mahdists. And when he got to Khartoum, of course, he went off script and decided to defend the city instead. British press up in arms. British press were up in arms and sort of getting the population behind them. Let's rescue Gordon, which is obviously what William Gladstone, the British Prime Minister, really didn't want to do. Saw no economic point in British being involved in Sudan. They had, as a bit of a sop, while they were trying to work out what to do with Gordon, had sent a force to the Red Sea coast, to the port of Suakin, which is just north of Port Sudan nowadays, and to relieve two Egyptian garrisons who were just inland. And the British expedition, so it was really showing the flag. There wasn't really an attempt to rescue Gordon, but it was waving the flag saying, hey, British press, British public, we are in Sudan trying to do something. Egyptians, by the way, we are trying to help you out with your lost colony of Sudan. And so General Graham presided over the victories at the Battle of Tamai and El Teb, which I, again, done videos for. In the meantime, we had the Nile expedition under Garnet Wolseley trying to go up the Nile, trying to rescue Gordon of Khartoum. It failed. Gordon of Khartoum was stormed. Gordon was killed in late January of 1885. And again, the British press up in arms. What the heck? You've killed. Gladstone was known as the murderer of Gordon. He originally had the titles MOG. Sorry, GOM, Grand Old Man, and the press turned it to MOG, murderer of Gordon. So again, there was a political impetus to do something. General Graham was sent back to the Red Sea coast to do quite what? That is a great question. In theory, to build a railway to Berber on the Nile. They had to still, the inland, the hinterland was all Mahdist, in particular in this area, controlled by Osman Digna. And basically, Graham fought two battles, Battle of Hasheen on the 20th of March and the Battle of Tofrek on the 22nd. Tofrek was a victory for the British and Indian army, actually. And but they lost something like 70 men killed, 100 wounded, something like that. But Osman Digna lost best part of 1,000 men in the Battle of Tofrek. It included the East Surrey Regiment were there, which is an interesting one because, of course, in the Four Feathers, it's the North Surrey. Harry Faversham is a member of the North Surrey Regiment. It doesn't exist, but which leads on. I definitely, whatever I do with Chris Parkinson, I'll do something about the Four Feathers at some stage as well. Okay, because I think it's a cracking book, and it's again, Truth of Four Feathers. I think also maybe one about Gordon, the film cartoon, Charlton Heston. How close was that to the truth? Actually, compared to Zulu, a lot closer to the truth, but great film. Anyway, and interestingly, part of that Indian army that were at Tofrek were the 15th Ludhiana Sikhs, who appear in one of my recent stories about the Second Opium War, the storming of the Taku forts. So funny how these regiments get around as well, including Indian regiments, many of whom had an incredible history of bravery and valor and service during the British Raj. So there you go. The long and short after the Battle of Tofrek was really two things happened. Wolseley was still not sure what to do on the Nile because, of course, his whole original thing had been to rescue Gordon. Gladstone now turned around and said, just march on Khartoum and teach the Mahdi a lesson. So Graham was sort of now being said, okay, you construct a railway across the desert. It so happened that there was an incident, the Panjshir incident in Afghanistan, where the Russians made some advances into Afghanistan, or potentially were going to advance into Afghanistan, which threatened British India, or was seen to threaten British India. And so everything in the Sudan, all bets were off. It's like, why do we want to be fighting the Mahdists? Well, we don't want Sudan. We don't want to add it to the British Empire. And we need as many troops as we can to be ready to be shipped out to, well, possibly to India to fight the Russians as they poured through the Khyber Pass, or indeed ready for some sort of, it could turn into a bigger action against Russia. We might need them either on home territory or doing something in the Med, in the Black Sea, another, a repeat of the Crimean War, maybe even the Baltic. So General Graham was withdrawn from the Red Sea coast. They left one small port, that port of Suakin. They left that as a fortified town, besieged town, the lone outpost, really, of the Egyptian Empire in Sudan, what was left of it. And it was left under the governorship of a young British officer called Herbert Kitchener, who has a bigger role to play in the later British Sudan story. So there you go. I don't know if that was of interest this week. We've gone all over the place. Here we go. I can see further up here. Let's see where we're at. The Old Trip to Jerusalem in Nottingham, great pub. The Old Trip to Jerusalem. Is it the oldest pub in England? As I say, it all depends, doesn't it? I mean, gosh, oldest pubs in England. We can't even agree on what the last battle in Britain was, really, can we? Was it Culloden? Was it Sedgemoor? Sorry, in England, Sedgemoor. Was it Preston? Was it Clifton Moor? Was it the Battle of Graveney Marsh in the Second World War? So we're never going to agree on what the oldest pub is. The Old Trip to Jerusalem, supposedly Crusaders met there before going off on crusade. Supposedly, it's in the right sort of location. Is it underneath Nottingham Castle? Could have happened. Golden Lamb. Dickens liked it. I don't know which one Dickens liked, Terry. Was that the Golden Lamb? Personally, it's not the oldest pub at all, but I tell you, a great pub. Anyone in London going there at all, get down to Wapping, past Canary Wharf, the Prospect of Whitby. Great pub. Charles Dickens used to write there. Great, right by the Thames. Amazing. I always think that our mutual friend. I could imagine him writing it there. Talk about the mist on the Thames. God, how literary am I? Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for adding. I mean, I think there could be something we do about the Civil War. The danger with Civil War is finding that fine ground between being very top line and going into so much detail into battles that you really don't know about. And actually, most people on YouTube don't want to know about. And I could waste a lot of time going down that road. And a lot of you might be saying, Chris, the 18th battle is enough. Thank you. Stop. So I've just got to find that line. But definitely the English Civil War, or the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, had a massive impact on Britain, and ultimately still have shaped Britain as it is today in different ways. Okay. Where are we at? British American. We've got Poldark. Oh, Poldark, great one here. I could do some stories about Cornwall, but not yet. When Charles II died, his brother James II became king. Yes, and that led us to the Battle of Sedgemoor. I'm not going to go down that. I'm not going down that rabbit hole. But I think that again is another fascinating period in history, and of course, ultimately led to the whole Jacobite rebellions in Britain, in England, in Scotland, most certainly, and of course the continuation in Ireland, with James then having to go and try and raise a rebellion in Ireland, which William of Orange, William III of England, put down. And of course, his supporters and people in acknowledgement to him formed the Orange Lodges in Northern Ireland, which still play a part in both Northern Ireland's social and most certainly political fabric to this day. Characters rather than the battles for the War of the Three Kingdoms. Great idea. Thank you, Neil. And there's some very interesting characters, and very interesting women actually played roles in the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, which tend to get downplayed, but some interesting. Dickens liked the Golden Lamb. The Royal Standard of England near Beaconsfield has a recorded history going back to Roman times. Yeah, and Uncle Heavy, this is one of the classics. Are we talking about the oldest building, okay, or the oldest pub? Because you can be a pub in a building, couldn't you? In theory, I could go and open a, well, I wouldn't be allowed to, but I could open a pub in the Colosseum in Rome and say it's the world's oldest pub. What I actually mean is it's in the world's, well, not necessarily oldest building, but you get the drift. And of course, pubs all had different things. There were public houses, there were taverns, there were inns, all of which had slightly different roles in society during history. And all of them, again, there's a, which is which. So I'd love to do some talks about the history of pubs per se, but also the history of pub names. Because the one that I love, the Marquis of Granby. I don't know if anyone's got a Marquis of Granby near them. I mean, I recently did a short about the battle, the Alma. There's loads of Alma pubs kicking around in Britain, all as a salute to the Battle of Alma in the Crimean War. Very often funded by a landlord would have been a veteran from Alma. And same, the Marquis of Granby, one of those great pub names. Marquis of Granby was a British military general. He was the eldest son of the Duke of Rutland. That's the title that the Duke of Rutland's heir has, is the Marquis of Granby. And I can't remember when it was. It wasn't at Blenheim. It was sometime after that, but before the Napoleonic Wars. But the Marquis of Granby, anyway, he actually looked out for all his men, and any injured men who were basically being, invalided out of the army, he personally gave some money to. And they went off home, with a peg leg or whatever it was, one arm, and they set up pubs. And as a bit of a nod to the man who'd given them a pension out of his own pocket, they named them after him. So that's where most the Marquis of Granby's come from. So I think there's some great stories there, aren't there? The trip to Jerusalem is another one. So there you go. Thank you, Neil. You were off onto the Jacobite rebellions. Charles Edward Stuart being beaten by his cousin. If it wasn't a direct cousin, it's a cousin once removed or whatever. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And ironically, I think I mentioned last time, Charles Edward Stuart's brother, Henry Benedict Stuart, was actually impoverished after the French Revolution. He was living in France. He lost all his stuff. The revolutionaries took all his gear. He was a noble. He just happened to be a House of Stuart noble living in exile in France. And Henry Benedict Stuart was given a pension by none other than King George III, who he had been opposing or claiming the throne wasn't George III's, it was his. But George III gave him a pension. So there you go. Nothing like families, hey? There you go. So look, after finishing the week talking about pubs and pints, I think that's a suitable time to finish, don't you? Thank you, everyone, for joining me again today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Once again, I always try and finish. One day I'll finish early. But you know what? It's quite fun not to be, isn't it? What do people think, just a matter of interest, about me doing a talk about a specific subject rather than doing these little tidbits? How about if I turned around and said, let's do as an example, the British invasion of Tibet, War on Top of the World. That's a good title, isn't it? Or something maybe from the English Civil War or Jacobites, but doing it as a talk like this. So unfortunately, not too many visuals. But I can do visuals because I've got a flip chart, a bit of hand drawing, maps and things. But would that be of interest? Because I'll tell you what, loads of you have loads of ideas about topics for me. Okay, one of the two biggest issues I have, actually, there's three big issues I have with the videos that I put out. Okay, number one, I script them all, so that takes a lot of work. And maybe if I didn't script but just had some notes that could talk around a bit like this, that would be better. That'd be quicker. Next, I have to source all the images. That takes a fair few hours as well, okay? And then finally, I have to record and edit the whole lot. Editing, I reckon editing, including putting all the pictures in, 5, 6 hours, okay? So if I didn't do any of that, I could cover a lot more history ground for you. The stories wouldn't be quite as tight. They'd be a bit more free-flowing. But I don't know if you're interested in me trying something like that. If you think that's a really bad idea, then please say so. If you think it's a great idea, also say so. I'd just like a bit of a sense check now. I appreciate I've lots and lots of viewers on YouTube, and you guys are a small band, us few, us happy few, us band of brothers, but and sisters. You guys tune in, and I would see you as some of my most not just loyal, that sounds real, but you're part of the real fan club, aren't you? And you like what I do. So tell me whether that would be good or not. You like the casual chat formats, Uncle Heavy pot? Oh, sorry. Several hours. How about both, Chris? I'd hate to lose what you have now. Terry, are you talking about this sort of chat? You don't want to lose this chat? Because sorry, the live style of talking like this, okay, would be alongside the long form videos that currently come out. And I'm also thinking that these sort of chats would stay once a week, but I'm wondering whether maybe once a week we could do something sort of a hybrid, but where I don't keep talking on the chat so much. Maybe I come back to the chat at the end and you can put questions in and things, but you just don't get the visuals. So we'd have the long forms, we have Friday as usual, and then we have something else. And that way we could cover a lot more ground. But I didn't really explain myself earlier, mainly because the idea is just rolling in my head at the minute. You've enjoyed today. Thank you very much, Steph. Thank you. I like the current way. Okay, that's full. Do it live and as a PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, who said that? Uncle Heavy. There are tools you can get, but YouTube don't have them. Okay, that lives. If I did it on something like Zoom, okay, then I can have a PowerPoint presentation, or Keynote is what I use. But anyway, if I do it like this live on YouTube, number one, I can't see all your faces, but far more importantly, I can't add the slides. So that's a bit of a pain. But and I certainly do talks like that on YouTube. Sorry, on Zoom. In fact, I did one recently about the House of Stuart as kings and queens of England. And in fact, members, you've got access to it. I uploaded it into the members channel here on YouTube, so you can see that. And that lasted for well over an hour, talking from James I right through to Queen Anne, and then indeed how the Stuarts finish and Bonnie Prince Charlie and co don't get the throne, and the German Georgians get it, German Hanoverians get it. So I can do that on Zoom, but unfortunately I haven't found a way of doing it like that here on YouTube, which is why I think this particular style of chat works really well. If I was talking to you about the Battle of Hlobane live and just sitting here talking at you, not sure it would work as well, but you might have other opinions. Vote on a subject on a Friday for a Wednesday freeform chat on the subject. Charlie, I like that idea. We can have a little vote. That would be a good one. Again, in the community poll on YouTube, you can have polls. Sorry, on the community post, you can have polls. The only problem is I haven't found a way of linking the poll. It just sits there. I haven't found a way of linking it into something like this. So there is a danger. All of you folk will be saying, yeah, go for, I don't know, Boer War. And out there on the poll in the rest of YouTube, everyone says, oh, no, we don't want the Boer War. We want the American War of Independence, or whatever it might be. And you guys are thinking, oh, that's not what I wanted. Right. The Zoom chat was fantastic. Thank you very much, Neil. I think that's what you meant. And yeah, I enjoy it. And one of the things I do like about Zoom is I can see everyone's faces, and we can also then open the microphones and we can actually talk. I can hear who you are. You can hear who people are, which again, we don't have here. The only good news on this is if you're eating your lunch, or the dog is barking, or your wife is now having a go at you as to why you're still on YouTube, we don't hear any of that either, do we? So yeah, swings and roundabouts. Anyway, folks, look, this has been great. I'm off to Cornwall. Well, I'm off to Cornwall tomorrow morning, so I hope the sun might just about shine. I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for all your support, as ever. If you haven't seen it, go and watch the Battle of Hlobane now, or have a look down in the description, Battle of Tofrek, or the Second Suakin Expedition for General Graham in Sudan. real forgotten bit of British history and British imperial history. And also check out Natasha and Debbie's channel down there as well. I've also done one on, there's also a link down there for the a video of mine about the Wars of the Roses explained. Just about 20 minutes to discuss the Wars of the Roses. Real whistle stop tour. But again, it's one of those things that, everyone's heard of the Wars of the Roses in English history. Don't know much about it. So what was it all about? Maybe go and do that. So anyway, have a great weekend. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you all very soon. Next week's main video, the Bantam battalions, the short men, the men under 5'3", who the British Army wouldn't accept in the First World War, and how these battalions under Member of Parliament, Bigland from Birkenhead, he funded his own battalion of basically short asses. And there was a corporal who was 4'10". Imagine being bollocked by a corporal who's 4'10". I don't know whether it'd be really scary or slightly comical, but just goes to prove the Bantam battalions actually proved their worth in the First World War. Loads of people have been asking me to do a talk about the Bantam battalions, so that's going to be next week's video. So brace yourselves. Thursday night, 6 p.m. UK time, next Thursday, right in front of Good Friday. We'll be doing the Bantams. I will be doing something on Friday next week. It's Good Friday here in the UK, public holiday for most folk, but I will be coming live for you, and no doubt running over time as ever. See you soon. Thanks for joining me. Keep well.